Hello everybody and welcome to the stream. So today we're gonna do some more OpenTelemetry stuff. We're gonna talk about OpenTelemetry Web. So if you aren't familiar with OpenTelemetry, let me kind of start with a short introduction to that, right? If you've heard me talk, or maybe you've read about observability, right? It's this kind of hot new thing. I don't want to say new, but you've heard about observability. And the whole idea of observability is you want to understand what your system is doing, right? So we tend to think about this a lot in terms of just like the back end. So maybe a bunch of Java or Python or Node or things like that are running in Docker containers and Kubernetes. And for a lot of people, that's where the discussion kind of ends, I think. But what I want to go through today is I want to show you OpenTelemetry Web, which is a bunch of packages that allow us to really take OpenTelemetry and integrate it into our front-end code, integrate it into our static websites or our JavaScript, and we can use the data that generates to help us understand the performance of our page as it loads, and we can use it to capture useful information about like how are people using our site, what are they clicking on, right? Now, some people might be watching this and saying like, oh, well, I have like analytics for that, right? I have Segment or I have other tools. I'm not going to say like, oh, you shouldn't use that, but OpenTelemetry actually has a lot of stuff kind of out of the box that can be useful not only for this sort of discrete performance information, but by adding it in, you're able to sort of build a good foundation for the next steps. Good morning, everyone. But yeah, with all that said, let's go ahead and cut over. I'll be watching the chat. I'll be drinking some coffee. And we'll get this thing done, yeah? So the first thing I want to show you is what we're going to be working on. So one of my contributions to OpenTelemetry is I kind of do the website. And here it is in all of its glory. Now, the actual site itself is pretty straightforward. One of the things that I've tried to keep in mind with this is, I don't want something that's like got a ton of scripts on it, or is something that is going to be, really, it doesn't need to be super dynamic, right? There's not a lot that we need to actually show people. So we've got kind of this about section, there's some project information. We have our documentation section here. Get it down a little more, actually, make it easier to hear me. We have our documentation, and some of this is actually links to like other things. So if I click on Python, it's going to actually take me to the Python docs on Read the Docs. And then we have the OpenTelemetry registry, and this is where you can find sort of integrations and plugins and exporters and stuff like that. So if I go over to the repo here, now if you're not familiar with Hugo, what Hugo is Hugo is a static site generator. And how it works at a really high level is you create template files in HTML, and you use the Hugo templating language, which is it's basically Go templates. And it runs those through a processor with sort of content that you can write in Markdown. And at the end of it, it spits out a bunch of HTML files or JSON files or kind of what have you. There's a lot of neat tricks you can do, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those neat Hugo tricks. But for an example, let's look at this homepage here. This is actually, just a bunch of partial files put together. So if I want to see, like this hero image up here and this sort of hero section, that's defined in home hero HTML. I go to home hero HTML, and here is my partial for this part of the site that you see. One thing to kind of keep in mind with Hugo is if you see like these two braces here, this indicates a template block. So in this case, we're going to insert the value of subtagline. The $sign says this is a variable, and rather than like a function or something. So, and if we look up here, we see subtagline is actually being generated from site parameters that are then converted into Markdown. Site parameters are things I can set in my config. And I see here subtagline. OpenTelemetry makes robust, portable telemetry a built-in feature cloud-native software. And I can see right here where that's being taken from the parameters, brought into my template at the time that it's rendered, and ta-da, right now we have some HTML. So since this is a pretty plain site, like I've never had to set up a bunch of like JavaScript stuff. Like I've never had to set up a JavaScript bundler, for example. So since OpenTelemetry Web is still in beta, one of the things we're going to actually have to do is we're going to have to, as a first step we're going to actually have to set up a way to take the OpenTelemetry Web modules and then bundle them into a format that we can use on the front end. If you want to kind of look at an example of this outside of what I'm showing you, if you go to the OpenTelemetry JS repo in GitHub, under Tracer Web here, you'll see some examples of how to do this and how to, not exactly how to set everything up, but certainly how to use sort of the basic plugins. So for our purposes though, let's kind of start at the start. The first thing we should look at is what I said this isn't a JavaScript heavy site, right? And it's not, but we do need some JavaScript because OpenTelemetry Web is an extension of OpenTelemetry JS. This is running as a script on our page on the client. So let's look at what we already have. Hugo has a feature, Hugo has a way to automatically deal with your assets, so things like images or JavaScript files or like Sass, SCSS, right? It can actually take those and it can do modification on them, so it can minify JS, it can compile Sass or SCSS for you, and conventionally that stuff lives in a folder called assets. So you can actually see in our assets we have all of our Sass files that comprise of CSS. We won't really be dealing with that much. And then we have these two JavaScript files. So one is our app.js. This is a pretty straightforward. What this does is this controls the toggle for the menu bar. And if I switch over here to a phone view, shrink the viewport, like you can see, this is really all that app.js is doing. Not much. Now, slightly more interesting is search.js. I go back to the registry. We have this registry search. So if I search for Lightstep here, I will get a filtered list, or it'll look for anything with Lightstep in the name of it. Now, how are we doing this without, a search server or whatever? Well, what we're actually doing is we're using a JavaScript library called Fuse and a feature of Hugo which allows you to create JSON from content files. So a content file in Hugo is really anything that can be run through the template engine. Markdown, I believe you can do other interesting things with this, but we're mostly using Markdown. So the registry works by having a lot of different Markdown files, and each one of these Markdown files is like a single item in the registry. So if I kind of look over here, we have OpenTelemetry Lightstep Exporter for Go, Exporter Go Lightstep. And what happens when the site is built, Hugo will actually look through everything in this registry folder, and it will generate a big JSON file with all of the, or not all, but a selection of the fields in this Markdown file in that folder, in that file as JSON, as like a big blob of JSON actually. Then we have, so when you actually search something in here, what's happening is this is calling get JSON. This is using a lot of jQuery. One thing I'd like to do is actually refactor all this to not use jQuery, but maybe that's another day. But we're getting the JSON from this endpoint, so I can actually show you. It's actually available. Just, you know, you could do this. Like I said, I'm doing this on the live site. You can do this yourself if you like. But you can see, you know, here's the raw data. Again, it's just a huge array. And then each item in this is one-to-one mapping between one of my Markdown files that has a registry entry in it, and then you know, in here you can see the description, language, tags, repo, just a bunch of stuff that our Fuse library can then go through and search through this array. It basically pulls it into memory on the client side, does a fuzzy match through it, and then whatever it finds, it spits back out, and then we template it into our results, which is cool. So that said, that's all the scripting there is. Now app.js is present on every page because it needs to be to control the, you know, clicky menu thing. So our first step, I think, is going to be, we're going to need to add OpenTelemetry to app.js because it's sort of the first thing there. It's kind of the thread that runs through the entire application. But since OpenTelemetry Web is only available, you know, as ESM modules, and there's not yet like a handy, like one of the things that hopefully will happen in the future with OpenTelemetry Web as we move towards GA is a way to maybe have it available through a CDN or some way that you don't have to do this extra step. But today you need to bundle the files into your web app or into your client-side scripts. So let's go. I've actually already added some of this to our package.json. But the biggest differences here, we've brought in Webpack and Webpack CLI. We've set up some scripts for starting the Webpack development server and the and building the modules for production. And then we've also added in several dependencies here. Now, these dependencies are all of my required OpenTelemetry dependencies for what I want to do. Go through them briefly. Core is sort of the core components that you need just to make it work. Tracing is the tracing specific stuff. So a trace is a collection of timing information about operations that happen that are linked in some way. Web is the specific web browser, like the web extensions to this. So this is how OpenTelemetry is able to kind of easily hook into the browser and understand like how, you know, what's going on, right? Like when are things loading or unloading. We have these two plugins, so document load and user interaction. Document load kind of does what it says on the tin. When the page loads, this is able to automatically hook in and then track how long it takes for all of the assets on the site to load, which is cool. User interaction creates spans for people clicking on things. And this exporter collector, this is so I can easily get my data out from this page, or out from basically send my data to a OpenTelemetry collector, which will aggregate it and then forward it to whichever backend system I choose to use. Context zone is the last thing here. So what this is this allows OpenTelemetry to handle asynchronous requests. Now, really on this site there aren't a lot. Actually, I don't think there's any async requests. So let's get rid of that because we don't need it. Now, once I have my dependencies kind of installed here, I'm going to do two more things. I'm going to make a new directory for my JavaScript. And the reason why I'm going to do this is I don't want Hugo to take these the files that exist now and move them over into the site. I want Hugo to take the bundled ones and then just copy them over. So I'm going to move assets.js, JS to source.js. And now my app and my search JavaScript files are in this new route path. Now I'm going to create a Webpack config. The Webpack config is what basically teaches, or what tells Webpack what to do. So we need. So one nice thing about Webpack is we're not going to get into it too much, but Webpack allows me to use. I mean, you can effectively think of this as a way to use node modules in the browser, because it's able to copy all the dependencies out of node modules and put it into kind of a single or multiple JavaScript files. We actually do want multiple JavaScript files in this case, and the reason why is because we don't want to load that search file on every single page. So we need to tell Webpack, hey, where do you start looking for stuff? And since we have two of them, we're going to do app.js. Then we're going to do a search one. So this is where Webpack will look for sort of the source files. Now we need to tell it how to output them. And again, we want to put them into our assets directory. So the brackets there means that it's going to replace the name with whichever entry it's in. So this will generate two files, one called app, one called search. Now we need to give it a target, web, and we need to tell it how to resolve our node modules. Tell it to look in the directory it's in. And then we need to tell it what extensions to we probably don't need TSX. Probably don't need TSX and JSX, but And that's really the basic, that should be all the setup we need to do here. Now, we check our package.json, we have our scripts there, we have our thing there. So let's try running this. Let's check out our site on the browser. All right. It's running, so that's good. We can look at sources a little bit. There we go. So you see the file hash that's being appended there. This is something that Hugo is actually doing, where it's copying the file. Like, short version is we are having our file bundled first by Webpack, and then it's going into the assets folder, and then Hugo is copying it into the static directory. But while it's doing that, it's taking a fingerprint of the file so that we can have our integrity thing here, and also it's giving it kind of a unique asset ID. Does But the other thing that I can see here is that, and I kind of did this a lazy way. If you were doing this like for realsies, you would want to add in like source maps, and you would want ways to make this easier to debug, because what Hugo is going to, or what Webpack is going to do is, as it bundles it, it's going to actually minify my JavaScript. So this, turns into this here, which is a little more efficient in terms of space. Yeah, minification, it's great. So now that I've got Webpack set up, my next step is going to be to add in OpenTelemetry. So this is, let's see. I'm about to look at the docs here, but let's see if I remember it. Let's actually look what are the rest of I think it's batch ban processor maybe? So what I need to actually bring in now is sort of the rest of OpenTelemetry. Need my span processor. I'm going to use a console span export for now, just so that we can see what's going on. But in the real world, and actually probably here in a little bit, we're going to bring in our collector exporter to send this data somewhere. We also want to import the web tracer provider. That's basically that's our automatic instrumentation for browsers. And let's get our document load. And let's also get our user interaction plugin. And that should be all the plugins that we need to import. Now, since we don't really have any async stuff going on, we're not going to worry about setting up the Zone Context Manager. This helps us if we did have a lot of async things happening. This helps with making sure that our spans are kind of properly connected by effectively adding a way to track. Since JavaScript doesn't really have threads per se, this is analogous to thread local storage. If you're a JavaScript person, you probably know what I'm talking about, and you think I should just shut up, which is something I can do. But what we need is our provider. This would be a web tracer provider. And for plugins, we want to add in our document load. Is it document load? Might just be document load, I might. We don't need parameters, and then we need user action. Now on that provider, we need to add a span processor, which will be our console span exporter. And we need to wrap that inside a span processor. And then we need to register the provider. Because I didn't screw this up. Might not be batch span processor. Yeah. Pull up the JS stuff. Oh, is it not? Oh. SDK thing. And we'll search the GitHub. Yeah, it is batch span processor. All right. So the difference between the batch and the simple processor is that a simple processor is going, every time a span is created, every time a telemetry is generated, basically it's going to send that off somewhere, right? It's going, in this case, it's going to export it to the console. A batch span processor will wait and sort of bundle stuff. When actually, if I sit down and think about it for a second, I probably don't want the batch span processor because I want, since I'm going to be instrumenting kind of a client-side application here or a front-end app, I probably want to bias a little bit towards making sure that any data I can get is delivered. And this is something that we could maybe, you know, like, this is definitely one of those things that, depending on sort of your use case, like I can probably get away with this. I'm not sure, you know, if you had like 1 million requests a second on your website, then you would probably want to batch things, and you might even want to go a little bit further and think about using like web workers or something, and sort of moving telemetry completely side channel to your, you know, your business logic, quote unquote. So, oh, nope, still the wrong button. Let's see if got any of that. I didn't know. So, what we're gonna do is rerun this. So that it rebuilds. So that it rebuilds the JavaScript files. Hey, if anyone has any questions, by the way, feel free to say hi or ask them. So the good news is we have oh. What did I do wrong there? This is a Webpack issue. Or I screwed up somewhere else. Oh. Might be because I was not super tasky about my JavaScript up here. Oh. New console span exporter. Oh. God. Wrong import. It's tracing, not core. Moral of the story. Alright, so now if we click around, hey! So what just happened there, right? Because now we have all this stuff in our console. So since we registered this console span exporter, what it's going to do is to send that telemetry out, it's going to actually just write it into console, like doing a console log, right? And what do we have? So we have a few different ones. I've got this document load, and I have various different events on it. So what these are our actual spans. This is the actual, you know, like underlying stuff that is happening on our page generated by our instrumentation. And to get this, like I didn't actually, I mean, outside of this, right, outside of adding sort of this stanza in, I didn't have to do anything fancy. And in fact, if I wanted to kind of really do like a nice separation of concerns, I think I should be able to do this. So I'll make tracing.js. I'll bring this over. and then I'll import my work. I think this should work. If it doesn't, we'll undo it. Yeah, works. So what I did there is I refactored out my tracing code, like my telemetry code, from the actual app.js file itself. I put this into this new tracing.js file just to kind of keep everything clean and separated. And then in app, I've imported the tracing code. And you can see as I'm navigating around, I'm getting all of these spans. And so let's see if I search, getting my document load, I'm seeing I find the name. Oh, document fetch. Component is document load. And there's other things I could do here, right? If I wanted to sort of enhance this, if I wanted to get in and add more information, I could go into here and then I could actually export this provider from the module, and then I would have a handle on my actual OpenTelemetry tracer. What that handle let me do is that would let me go in, sort of get the active span and add in my own custom attributes, which is something maybe we'll come back to this and do in another stream. However, for now, we've got our basic sort of tracing and stuff like that working, right? The main page. Why isn't it here? One thing you might notice is I've made makes it a little bigger, which isn't great. I think there's probably a way to remove. I'm sure there's a plugin for Webpack to remove these copyright notifications, which would be nice. But yeah, like on some level, you are adding in some overhead in terms of. In terms of the page load time, because your bundle is going to be larger. Yeah, I mean, we're up to 280 kilobytes, and what's this on live? So on live it's 601 bytes, locally it's 280 kilobytes. Obviously a big difference. Now, the trade-off you have to so I guess there's 2 points I would make here. One, everything in programming is a trade-off, like nothing is free. And I think that the extra data you can get from having this telemetry, and then also that you can get from sort of connecting this up to a bigger system, is worth it. Two, it's still in beta. We'll be making performance improvements, like the JavaScript SIG. I'm sure we'll be making performance improvements to the bundle size over time. And I don't know, 200 kilobytes. What's 200 kilobytes, right? So now that we've done that, I think our next best step is actually going to be trying to get this data somewhere interesting. We already have this collector exporter. Let me... I don't really think there's time for it today, unfortunately. But what we'll do next time is we'll actually get this out from console and into something different, right? So I showed you in the imports this collector exporter. What the collector exporter lets us do is it lets us take this telemetry data and then sort of aggregate it in one place and then forward it to a variety of backend systems. So in this case, we're probably going to do Lightstep, but we can also, maybe we'll also send it to like Jaeger, or maybe we can turn it into like a dashboard if we get some metrics going with like Prometheus and Grafana and stuff like that. So that's, we're going to put that in the future work bucket. Right now, yeah, let me see. Let me see if I can... Actually, I'll just look up how I did this before. There we go. Wait, no, I didn't do it that way here. How did I do that? I think it's this. Module exports equals provider get tracer. I think this will do it. Then it might be an example. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to actually get the handle from the tracer itself so that I can call it more easily. Oh, right, it's... So we actually need to... Provider get tracer. To web. Tracer equals then we give it a name. Now we should be able to do get I'm actually not sure what will happen here. But I really don't know what the interplay between everything is going to be. But I would kind of like to do... can't resolve. Helps if I spell things right, doesn't it? Hey, no problem, Caffeine Shakes. Thanks for joining. Alright, so what we did right here is rather than sort of having our tracing code, our OpenTelemetry code just blindly initialize and register and hook into sort of the DOM lifecycle and the browser lifecycle, now we're actually exporting the underlying OpenTelemetry object, I guess you could say, out to wherever it's required, ever we call it. So we're importing it here with require, and the kind of $1 million question is what span is this going to get? Again, it helps if I do things right and not wrong the first time. So that might mean that there's no current span there. And finish. Yeah, it's end. It's not getting the right thing back. That should be it. We want the same one back. Well, something to mess around with more, I think, next time. What I'm expecting to happen is that I'm expecting to get back a handle on the underlying. This web tracer provider creates a tracer effectively, right? But it's a slightly different tracer than the one that is, like if you just ask OpenTelemetry, hey, give me a tracer, it's going to give you a tracer that's not really hooked into anything. But this web tracer, similar to the node provider that's also in OpenTelemetry.js, is going to give you one that is hooked into sort of the node internals. The web tracer will give you one that's hooked into sort of the browser internals. And what I would really like to do is be able to like take the hook into this document load and go from there. Chova, yeah, so we're showing off how to use OpenTelemetry with like a Hugo static site so that you can analyze performance of your site. Actually, we can come back to getting that reference, oh, actually I need to get rid of this. We'll come back to figuring out how to get that actual tracer another day. I actually feel like this should work too. That definitely. Alright, bear with me for a second here, guys. You learn web dev on your own, some courses from Udemy? Yeah. I feel like I've learned most things about web dev on my own. I get rid of that. I feel like I've run into some weird yes, yeah, because that still works. I feel like I'm either holding it wrong or there's like just something that I feel like I must be holding it wrong. Because what I might like to do is on this document fetch span, because I can see I've got all these different events for like when did I start, when did it unload, when did the DOM become interactive, you know, in sort of a boom 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 boom, right? Which is all useful stuff. But what I probably really want, what I actually am more interested in, is like what URL is someone loading? Which is something I can get through the JS API, right? Like I can get the URL, I can get the full URL, get query params, whatever. So what I think I'm gonna have to do is come back to it, figure out how to hook into that document load, and add in sort of my own attributes. So for next time, I guess we will take another step down this. We'll get the data going somewhere other than the console. We'll see if we can get custom attributes on our existing instrumentation, or just create like new spans inside of it. Like that would also be fine probably. But what I hope I've kind of shown you today is, you know, that how it's easy to get started with this. And admittedly right now it maybe doesn't look like the data doesn't look super useful, but once you get this like out of a console and into the collector, and we get it into like the back end of something so that we can actually really inspect what's going on, I think you'll find that, hey, this is actually like pretty useful and good. So with that said, it's been about an hour. I think we're gonna go ahead and kind of probably call it for the day. So thanks everyone for joining. I'll have this written up, and if you want to see the write-up of this when it goes live, be sure to follow me on Twitter. It's at Austin L. Parker. And if you would like to know what's coming up, if you want to know when the stream is live, be sure to follow the channel, click the little follow button. I would love to have you here next time. Probably be doing Tuesdays, Thursdays here for a while. Around the same time, maybe go a little longer on some days, a little shorter on some days. Really just depends on what we got. So thanks for joining, and I will see y'all next time. Peace.